now. Okay, so for case study 2, we are going to review the case from North Carolina on school funding. To start the issue off, I reviewed it, and basically it says that a district cannot decide about individual funding. It has to be a state decision. And so based upon that, and this letter to the community, I would think that in the North Carolina that this would not fly.
I was thinking the same thing. I was like, I don't think this would fly in North Carolina. I don't know if this would fly anywhere.
Right.
Now, all I know is the case study, well, I guess that because it was ruled in North Carolina, they could probably use it in another state if they made it to federal court with it as an example. But the case is from North Carolina specifically, so I don't know if it would fly in other states, or if it does. Obviously, it does fly in other states. I mean, as far as the argument for it, I see, because I've worked in I've worked in every kind of school basically. I've worked in Title I schools that were the lowest of the low, and I've worked in private schools that cost $20,000 a year to go to. So I've kind of seen it all. And I really think that the concept behind what this superintendent is wanting to do, I can see where he could justify it. Because when you work in Title I schools, all of your kids are on free and reduced lunch, yet you don't have paper to make copies, and you don't have toilet paper, and you don't have napkins, and you don't have the basic necessities you need to educate children. And then you go into community schools where there's wealthy families and they have one-to-one computers. What are your guys' thoughts?
I was kind of looking at it as one thing. I was kind of concerned about it because I know we have been talking about like just communication. So one of the things that just kind of stood out to me was the superintendent presented this big case, but then it was like, if you have questions, go to your principal.
Right.
And so that stood out to me with us talking about communication. It was kind of like, well, this principal may do it this way, but then this principal may do it this way. And so it was kind of like, well, what's the overall point? Because I know in some of the information we've looked at, principals are over their budgets.
Right.
And so it was just kind of confusing, as if this is the superintendent over several schools. It was just kind of like, well, this is what we're going to do. But if you have any questions, don't come to me, go to your principal.
And the thing about that is, I mean, there's going to be angry parents that are at these wealthy schools. So he's basically rolling out this initiative that's going to upset people, but he's saying go to your principal. And as the superintendent, he gets to give the budget to each school, but based upon this, he would directly allocate the dollars where they're supposed to be. So let's say all 4 of us are principals, and me and Brittany work in Title I schools, then he's going to give us more money than he gives y'all.
Yeah. Right. I just think it's kind of taken away. I just think in general, some areas it's taken away from.
And along with that, in the book, it talks about the school-based budgeting, and it says all stakeholders are supposed to be involved. So it doesn't say anywhere in that letter where they talk to parents or taxpayers or other teachers to to even put this plan together. So who agreed on it? Was it just him? Or was it the principals?
Yeah.
So again, when you bring that letter to the community, it's like, okay, I didn't vote on this, or I didn't know about this, or I don't agree with it.
That was something I was saying. I was like, did they get the community involved?
Well, I would think that for this to be a reality, now granted, it's just a case study, but I would think for this to be a reality, it would have to be approved by the school board, and they would have to go through an open session where people could discuss whether they felt that it was fair or not. And then once the school board voted on it, then it could go through. But it didn't mention this doesn't mention anything about that. So this is kind of a vague letter.
It was.
But I definitely think that he wouldn't be able to make a call like that on his own without having at least approval from the people that he gets the money from.
I agree.
Well, and I guess the other question is how did he get this letter out? Because it just says, "Dear parents and community members." So, I mean, I know that there's students will take the letters to their parents theoretically, but then also that was something that kind of stood out to me is, I mean, did he mail it? Are we taking it to community members? Like, how are we getting this out? Is it social media? And again, the stakeholder thing stood out to me too, the fact that it wasn't there, and that raised a big question, because we did a thing at our school this year where we got community members together and parents and students, and we revisited our what's it called? Mission statement and values and that kind of thing, and aligned it to the South Carolina profile of South Carolina graduate. So that stood out to me too, even though it's not there, Amanda. I was just wondering, like, how many people were involved in this, who had a voice? Because, I mean, I know I'm in a small school district, and so a lot of times we can get things passed. And
Right.
school board, we've only got 2 high schools. And, so sometimes, we can get things passed that probably shouldn't get passed, unfortunately. But that just stood out to me.
I also was looking at what kind of data did they use to kind of push them towards it. It says something about last year we laid the foundation to enhance equality of funding decisions by piloting a certain program. Was it piloted at all schools, or did you specifically just use 1 or 2 schools?
Right.
Like, what data is backing up you to move forward and hoping that this is going to give you some success? Where, what's backing you up? What's your evidence?
Right, because it talks about the formula they used to use, but it doesn't talk about the formula that they're gonna use with this.
Yeah. Right. Yep. And I guess just having something, there needs to be some more set guidelines. It just seems so this one big huge thing, and there's so many different components of it. So if I'm reading it from a parent's perspective, I'm very detailed, so I'm going to need some more details to even buy into it or to help somebody else buy into it. I just need a little bit more. It's just not giving me enough information to understand.
The ironic,
if I know my child goes to a smaller school compared to other schools in the district, then I really would want to know what the formula is, because based on what they're saying, more schools pretty much means more money, or more students means
more money.
So I'm like, well, if my child goes to a smaller school, does that mean they're going to receive less funding?
Yes.
Is that really fair, or is that okay?
Well, I'm going to tell you this. I talked with my site supervisor is my assistant principal, but now she just got our principal job that was open, and you're okay. And I talked with her about it, and that's something that she was upset about, because we're the small school we're the small school in our district, and then we're a 2A, or really a 3A now, but we have a 5A school in the district, and so because we have less students, we get less funding, even though we have needs that aren't getting met. The 5A school is getting more things when they don't need more staff. Makes sense?
Right.
Right.
So that's
the plan.
District.
Well, the ironic thing about it is it specifically states that they want to be transparent, but this is extremely untransparent.
Right.
It's
because
boring.
they're not explaining how they're going to allocate the funds, or what formula are they using. How are they going to allocate the funds? I would think that this would need to include like an actual number proposal plan to show. Even for parents, because the way that they spend the money is public record.
Yep.
And what do they mean by specific needs? So is it like special education? Is it gifted and talented? Is it Title I? What are the specific needs that they're referring to?
Yep.
Right.
So we've definitely taken a stance against it. So how do we take the stance for it? Because we're supposed to show both ways.
Well, I was saying before that working in Title I schools in Greensboro, in inner city Greensboro, I literally worked in a school that ran out of paper, toilet paper, and paper towels by the end of the school year before we were out, and they asked teachers to bring some in. That's how few money we had. They unplugged all of our copiers, and we couldn't make copies because we had no more ink. with a month left of school.
And I also look at the fact, we did the paper with all the laws, and every child is entitled to a education.
An appropriate
Right.
education.
An appropriate education. So that may fall into that category, making sure that this school provides everything that needs the money to provide everything they need so that everybody gets the appropriate education.
Right. So, I mean, you have that going on at one school, and then, 10 miles away, you have a school that has a computer for every student, and they want for nothing. Just, it's frustrating because the statistics show that, kids who are minorities, kids who are special education, kids who are ESL, they end up being in the same schools that end up being in the lower paying areas. So basically we're setting them up for failure when they already have everything else against them.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and that's what I was looking at our chapter on page 27. It's the focus point, the 14th Amendment. And it says that the 14th Amendment provides no state shall deny any person with jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. And then it's talking about how it's frequently cited in education cases that deal with race, gender, or ethnic background issues. So I understand the idea of trying to weight some of this based on Title I. But another issue that I know like our school deals with is the fact that all the elementary schools that feed into our high school are Title I, but our high school is not Title I. And it's because of our free and reduced lunch, our kids don't want to identify as that because that's a label, and they don't want their peers, to label them as living in poverty.
Same with our district as well. All of the elementary schools that feed into the major high school are Title I schools, but the high school is not considered Title I. And in a previous course that I took in another class, I researched the inequities with Title I funding, and there are inequities across the United States with Title I funding and how they allocate those funds, and they still haven't been able to develop a formula to make sure each school district or each school receives the funds that they actually need. And I think it's because from chapter 2 that we read, it talks about funding comes from so many different places. It doesn't come from one place. So you have access, some school districts have access to other funds that others not. So it's kind of almost impossible to have equity with funding, I feel like.
Right. And then on top of that, you have all of the grant money.
Yeah.
Like I working in a charter school, we write grants all the time because as strange as it sounds, that I've been visiting. I'm coming to South Carolina next week.
Oh.
I'm coming to a school called Meavers Charter Academy. It's outside of Charleston.
Oh, okay.
For a visit. We're going around and visiting other schools in our company. And it's interesting to me that the Title I schools have so much nicer stuff than my school. And my school we have I want to say 15% free and reduced lunch. And so we have a very heavy middle class to upper middle class population, but we don't ever have anything in our budget. We had to cut 3 teachers last year because our budget was over. And all of these other schools that are Title I have all this nice stuff. And you see where they allocate it and you're like, really? That's what you're spending your money on? It's very interesting to see the differences, because I don't feel like there's that much of a difference between my kids and the school down the road, but they're Title I and we're not. So I think that a lot of our parents, because there are some wealthy parents and children at our school, a lot of them don't want that free and reduced lunch label, so they won't fill out that paperwork.
Well, something else I was thinking, we have a new administrator. And I think I was saying earlier, the superintendent basically said, go to the principal. My principal now, he does not let us know anything. We don't know the budget wise. We were actually told this year that copies had to come out of our 275 that we get. We are no longer allotted copies.
What?
Yes, we have so many things have been cut from us because he is over the budget, which is one of the rules that they say principals are over the budget. And so it makes me think about, if you get a principal like that, and they've been giving the authority to be able to do what they need to do with the money, is the money going to get where it needs to be?
Right.
Right.
And it's funny because it can be seen as a pro and as a con, because, you know, we talked about teacher leadership and giving, empowering teachers, allowing them to make key decisions. And I had wrote that this particular budgeting plan would empower administration by allowing them to make key decisions. But when you have an administrator like yours, that doesn't really seem appropriate or fair. So I guess it depends on who has the power too, and what they view as appropriate or what's a need or not a need. So
yeah, my principal has basically cut everything you can think of. So it kind of makes me wonder, like you said, they kind of giving them power, but sometimes that's not always good because they may not be looking out specifically in a certain area.
Right. Like, I mean, and I can see that because, like, my background is special education. I have a soft spot for special education. I think everybody has some kind of a perspective. You know, if you as a preschool teacher go in
early childhood, like that's my early childhood.
So I mean, we all have our thing that is our soft spot where we want to help out, where we're passionate about. And this gets me in trouble sometimes because I'm not in EC anymore. I'm an administrator, and it's really hard for me to stay out of EC issues when I feel passionate about it. But then I'm like, that's not your job anymore. You need to put your hand over your mouth and shut it. Well, I think that we've done a good job of representing. I mean, we've made the point that we see the inequities in schools where there are children who are already at a disadvantage, and that could be an advantage to this plan. And we've also seen where giving the power to one person, a superintendent, putting this back on the principals, and the lack of clarity in the plan and formula would be the disadvantages. Is there anything else I missed?
I think
You got them all.
Okie dokie, ladies. Well, it's lovely to see you.
Yes, as always.
I've got to remember, it's been so long since I've done this. I'll have to remember how to post this to YouTube. But as soon as I get it figured out, I'll share it to you guys through email.
Okay, thank you.
All right, sounds good. Thanks.
Bye, ladies.
Good night.
Good night.